said, Dr. Crawford, I'm just wondering if seen, how do you treat differently, or what do you do differently? And have you seen, I'm sure you have fentanyl, but also the fentanyl analogs and now xylazine. Have you treated somebody who's been using the xylazine? Because it is relatively new. I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely, and unfortunately. And so when you have fentanyl and fentanyl analogs that we see as well now that are even more potent or stronger, some things that change are that you may need more than one treatment with naloxone, for example. I've had folks where we used all the naloxone we had on hand, and we actually were waiting for the code card to get to us so that we could push the medication intravenously or intramuscularly. They just weren't responding intranasally. So when you're dealing with these sort of new classes of potency or strength of these substances, it's a new challenge. We also see a phenomenon like was described previously, where fentanyl is so deadly not only because of the potency, but also because it has a profound effect on what we call chest wall rigidity, in that it actually makes your chest tighten and even harder for you to breathe, even if you had a little impulse from your body to keep breathing. So there's new things that we see that come with the new substances. Xylazine, we're seeing really profound wounds all over the body. It doesn't have to be at the injection site that need to be treated in different ways. We've seen folks with amputations from these wounds. And as you're describing, we don't know the best ways to treat these things medically yet. There's not enough time and evidence to support it. So we're doing our best to treat it symptomatically and keep folks alive.
All right, you raised all kinds of questions for me. One, most shocking one, the wounds from xylazine, are they self-inflicted, or is it they don't feel the pain, so they get injured accidentally, or is it something that they're doing as a part of a reaction to the drug?
Yeah, it's a reaction to the substance. And
wow.
We think what is likely happening is that this substance, xylazine, causes essentially clamping of the blood vessels throughout the body, and that's why we can see it in places other than where someone may be injecting. And what happens is that the tissue will die, and it dies from essentially deeper levels and then out. So it's different than a wound you may see that starts as a skin infection and then goes down. And so folks need to be trained to look for this all over the body and then comfortable in how they actually treat this different type of wound.
And then the other question that your previous comment raised, and we've all seen the studies and reports, but when somebody's taking fentanyl or fentanyl analog and you're trying to do the naloxone, or Narcan is another common name for the same substance, and you all are pushing it in, what that indicates to me is that when Chief Ceravola finds this happening on the street, he's got no way of knowing how much Narcan he should give that, or his officers have no way of knowing how much Narcan they should give without getting them to somebody like you who's an expert. Is that a fair statement?
It's fair to say that. Yeah, I think what we always guide folks, and when we talk with our excellent folks in the front lines in the first responder field, is do what you can with what you have. Try to stabilize folks. What we can do is we can breathe for folks. We can do CPR. We can try to keep them alive and as viable as possible to make it to the next step, which is where we have all the intensive treatment, where we can intubate and put tubes in to help them breathe and do all the next level medical care.
But because these substances are relatively new, not always predictable, particularly with the analogs or with the xylazine, both you and the frontline people in many cases are just having to experiment and hope you get it right. Is that a fair statement as well? Is that true?
We follow the evidence when it's there.
I understand.
And when it's something new, we treat symptomatically and do our best to keep them alive.
But if it didn't work, and you're going to go a little bit further in hopes that it does work, correct?
Yes, we would not give up.
I yield back.
Thank you.
Back. The chair recognizes Dr. Bashan.
Thank you. I just want to get on the record on the fentanyl. It's coming from China to Mexico through cartels to the United States of America, killing our citizens. That's not my opinion. That's what's happening. So I'm speaking to the fentanyl itself. So, all of us at the federal level, not only we're looking at preventing people from using it, or the demand for drugs by helping people get off of illicit drugs and treat them. But we're also looking on the supply side. I just want to put that on the record. That is, the question is, how do we address that? We're trying to address the fentanyl analog situation and making the current administration scheduling of fentanyl analogs permanent, because believe it or not, the scientists in China, primarily China, chemists will literally change one little molecule on the fentanyl, and then it is technically may not be illegal in the United States, and they can actually bring it in the United States legally unless we have fentanyl analogs scheduled as Schedule 1, which means there's no medicinal use, to be like heroin and other things. Just want to put that on the record. Dr. Crawford, this is a chronic disease, right?
Correct.
Would you say in the majority of cases you would not use the term cured in these cases? Like you would say for some other mental health?
Correct. We tend to refer to folks as being in recovery. In recovery,
yeah. I want to point that out. So I think also, what are your thoughts on not only medication-assisted treatment, which I'm a big supporter of, by the way, and those things, but ongoing so-called wraparound therapy, ongoing engagement with people who are in recovery, and how important that is also. Could you comment on that?
Yeah. So first, I'm a psychiatrist who then specialized in the treatment of addiction. So, of course, I believe in therapy and the support of all the other services that wrap around folks. I think it's important, and I know you're not suggesting this, but to recognize that the medications themselves or certain parts of it themselves can be very powerful alone as well.
Yes.
And so it could be dangerous to suggest that, it has to be this for a certain person and list all the components. We recognize that the gold standard for treatment of opioid use disorder is medication-assisted treatment, and then we offer everything else and share what the benefits are, but we shouldn't withhold certain parts of treatment because the person's not interested in other elements.
Agreed. I mean, I as a physician, I think, there's pretty good evidence to show, and my dad had an alcohol problem for a while. He ended up kicking it, but that this is a chronic problem, and that medication-assisted treatment, if you're talking about weaning people off of it and all these things, I just personally believe that people have to be for their lifetime engaged in some way in the treatment system, whatever that may be. Otherwise, there's like you pointed out, Chief, where what might happen to your mother and her alcohol problem if her other son died. There can be triggers that people have in their life, and suddenly, even though they're on the fringe of, they're doing well and they're in recovery, something could trigger them and they could flip back if they don't have someone to reach out to. So do you think that's, would you agree with that?
I think that's where the low barrier access comes in. So there's always an open door and there's no wrong door is eventually what we'd like to get to. So in that moment, someone may have been in recovery for 10 years, hadn't used the substance, and they had a slip or return to use. Knowing exactly where to go, or at least who to point them in the right direction, and then us welcome them with open arms with no judgment, is really what I think would be most effective.
How do we keep track of those people so we know? Say they don't come to you for 5 years. Are there programs where we proactively have reach out programs where we just touch base with people proactively from a provider perspective?
It's a great idea. I'm sure that there's some community organizations that do that. We also know that there are great models like 12-step programs, for example, that folks stay engaged in for decades, maybe their whole lives. Medically speaking, with the medical model, I don't see that very often, but I think there could be value in that.
Fair enough. And with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, I want to ask the Chief one thing. How many people are you seeing that are getting Narcan 3-4 times? You've been to their same house 3-4 times.
Oh, I've seen that multiple times.
So I'm a big supporter of Narcan, don't get me wrong, but one of the challenges that we do have is that in some areas people can get complacent and feel like they'll just show up and give me Narcan and save me, right? And I've had local law enforcement that have had to use so much Narcan they run out, and then they can't save people. Do you think that attitude prevails amongst the chronic users that, oh well, they'll just show up and give me Narcan?
I believe, I do know that there's been some situations where we saved someone and they actually woke up and fought with us.
Oh, yeah.
So it was, here we are trying to save them. Next thing you know, we're trying to save ourselves because they're mad that you ruined their high.
That is a side effect of Narcan. The doctor can probably talk about that too. Narcan, people can have tachycardia, fast heart rates, and this type of reaction, and so that's important to understand. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and I now recognize, hey, Dr. Joe, I just want to say to all your constituents that are sitting here, what a beautiful area of our great country, not only historically important. I have Mammoth Cave National Park, Abraham Lincoln's birthplace, so if you're doing the national park checkoff, please come to Kentucky. But I will tell you, this is stunningly beautiful. Everybody here has been wonderful to be around and be with. Saratoga Battlefield, we just got that from my friend from Saratoga. But the National Park Service, thanks. This is I'm proud of all the people that live in my district that work for the Park Service, and they make America's great historic treasures. And even though the history is not always the greatest of history, it's history, and it's important what you guys do. So thanks a lot. And Dr. Joyce.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I think it's important that I echo that sentiment. I'm the great-grandson of a Civil War veteran, and the battles continue. I think that we all recognize that one of the key battles that we have today is with opioid addiction, with the drug addiction that continues to permeate, not just here in rural Pennsylvania, but throughout America. I want to thank each and every one of you. I want to thank the National Park Service for providing us the opportunity. Today's hearing is about the Support Act, and we are going back to Washington with the great information that you have provided us with today to discuss how that should be reauthorized, how it might be altered, how it could be improved. So for my final question, I would like each of you to address, this is your opportunity to tell Washington, how should we make the Support Act better? What federal component should be improved? Ms. Keller, I'd like to start with you.
Very much. I would suggest extending care to loved ones, because like we heard from Mr. Straley, when you lose a loved one, you have a hole in your heart, and a lot of people do not know how to handle that moving forward. Or when you love someone with a substance use disorder, a lot of families don't know where to get help. So approaching this from a whole family approach and wrapping our arms around not just the person with a substance use disorder, but everyone around them that's affected by them, providing more resources for them to go to get help. And I would also urge you to invest in adolescent care. We are seeing a significant increase in young people with substance use disorder. And with the rise in fentanyl, we're seeing a lot of younger people using fentanyl as well. So investing in adolescent resources so they have access to treatment, to mental health providers, and there is a severe lack of that right now.
I think that's a great message to take back. We certainly saw the isolation that occurred with the lockdowns during COVID, that individuals, particularly adolescents, turned to escapes. And unfortunately, in some situations, that involved addictions that occurred. Mr. Straley, federal legislation that could be better improved or altered as we address the reauthorization of the Support Act.
I would say more funding for treatment centers and also sober living homes. And, certainly in our rural area, in Franklin County, we have one sober living facility for women and one facility for men. And they're constantly at full capacity. And we need more treatment centers and more sober living facilities to support those that are coming out and want to live a better life.
Dr. Crawford, as a physician, I recognize the importance of that this is recognized, that addiction is recognized as a disease. You made great comparisons talking about the possibility of weaning people from Suboxone over long term. And you alluded to, and I might just ask you to expound just briefly, you alluded to that someone who suffers from hypertension, I might even postulate that there could be people in this room who are on medicines this morning treating their hypertension. and maybe with alterations to diet and to weight reduction and to exercise, you could possibly be weaned from medicines that would treat your hypertension. Similarly for diabetes, type 2 diabetes. If you are treated with medicines for type 2 diabetes, if you alter your lifestyle, if you have weight reduction, you might be able to do that. In many cases, that's not the case, as you and I recognize as physicians. Can you address two things? I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you address two things? I do want to know how to alter, improve, and extend the Support Act and what recommendations you have as a federal level. But I also want you to talk about the need for ongoing long-term therapy as we recognize that addiction is a disease.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll try to be quite brief with the first part, and I appreciate the opportunity to share this. We touched on this briefly. I believe, frankly, that we're in a behavioral health epidemic. So, if I had a magic wand, I would say, let's do everything we can for behavioral health, but understanding we don't have that when we think about the Support Act. I think it would be fantastic to continue to expand, in addition to opioid use disorder, all the other substance use disorders that we see. We talked about the amount of folks who have died from poisonings, and that is not something we should take lightly, but we lose about 3 times as many people per year to alcohol. We lose about 5 times as many people to tobacco still. So there's a tremendous opportunity for us to do more. And then to answer your question about the need for ongoing long care, absolutely, right? So there's a very kind of discussed about and famous study within academic addiction circles comparing treatment outcomes and adherence to treatment, comparing addiction or substance use disorders to other chronic medical diseases, and there's no statistically significant difference between them.
Thank you. Chief Saravala, the message that this group on the Health Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce, if there's an alteration or modification to the Support Act, from a law enforcement perspective, what should we take back to Washington?
I think some of the things that we need to improve on is our drug take-back programs. Unfortunately, the last event I was not able to take part in, but I think getting some of the prescription drugs that aren't being used anymore out of the medicine cabinets is a big help. I think mental health, improve our mental health situations, making more beds available to people who need it to recover, and an early outreach and education, because I have a daughter that's going to turn 15 next month, and that's when I took my first drink, and I cannot imagine that she's going to be doing that. Honestly, she has a little bit of mental health issues as it is, and I'm afraid she's going to go down that road, but I have to stop that.
Again, thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member, and thank you for coming to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Thanks for hosting us. We appreciate it. Mr. Obolnote, gentleman kneels back. Mr. Obolnote, please recognize you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm delighted I get an opportunity to ask a second round of questions because, Dr. Crawford, I had one for you. I found your testimony very meaningful, and you said something that I found profound, enough so that I made a note of it. You said, we have treatment, and treatment works. But I think it's important that we're very frank on this issue because I might respectfully push back a little bit on that. I'm not sure I agree. I would say we have treatment, and sometimes it works. One recurring theme in people that lose their lives to addiction is that they quite often have been in and out of treatment their entire lives. That's certainly been true in my own extended family, where I have people that I love that have been in and out of treatment programs and just cannot seem to get the problem solved. Mr. Straley, gave some very incredibly emotional testimony about his daughter who, the same thing, in and out of treatment programs until she lost her life. So it seems to me when someone comes into treatment and says, I've had enough, I need help, I want this to be over, I'll do anything, let's go, and we put them through treatment and it doesn't work. We've missed that opportunity. What can we do to reduce, that cycle of in and out of treatment? What can we do to fix that problem that first time?
I wish I knew the full answer to that question. What I could share, and I appreciate your comment, you're absolutely right. So we have treatment and treatment works sometimes. It's probably a good caveat. When I make that comment, I speak medically, and so we have no treatment that works 100% of the time, really, but it is statistically significantly an improvement over not treating, for example. But yeah, so what can we do? I think one of the biggest things is taking an approach of harm reduction, as we've talked about, and also personalized care approaches. I think too often we are creating, a program that has a structure that we say, okay, this is how you come into it, and this is how it works for everyone, and we're all unique individuals with unique life journeys. And so I think having more flexibility, really truly meeting people where they're at, perhaps when they engage with us, we should be asking them more, what's the most important thing to them, instead of assuming we know and trying to prescribe it to them. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity in approaches like that.
Thank you. That's valuable. Ms. Keller, you said something in your testimony that really stuck with me also when you were talking about telehealth and the need to expand access to telehealth. For my district, telehealth has been a complete game changer, particularly during the pandemic. And I actually wish we would stop calling it telehealth, because I know that's the technical term for it, but when I talk about it, I call it virtual health, because telehealth just does not encapsulate how comprehensive our virtual treatment options are now. I mean, you're not just talking to a doctor on the telephone. Most of the time, you're looking at them through video conference. Sometimes you've got your own remote sensing instruments that they can use to make diagnoses. It is an amazing, game-changing technology. So, and I would say, following on to the discussion we've been having about trying to, when someone goes into treatment, trying to make it so that they get treated, that telehealth can be, Sarah, see, I did it, virtual health could be really, really instrumental in this, particularly because we can use it to treat some of the behavioral health options and epidemics that exist in our country. So my question for you is, because you are an expert in this, how can we in Congress expand virtual health and virtual health treatment options for the people that we represent?
For that, I agree that virtual health is going to be.
I like where you went there.
It's the way of the future, especially when it comes to treatment, because you can be in an opioid treatment program in an inpatient center and still be receiving mental health treatment or substance use treatment or just primary care treatment, especially in rural areas where you can't access a program, you can't drive to one or walk into one. So I think just making sure that insurance does cover it, that Medicaid covers it, and that every American has access to that, I think it's going to be a game changer. Especially you described you're in a very rural area, so I would venture to guess there's a lot of your residents who just can't drive to a treatment center.
Right. Yeah. Well, there were some flexibilities granted in Medicare treatment for virtual health options during the pandemic. Yes. I know that Congress has been working very hard to extend those flexibilities in areas where they were working, which is the vast majority of them. So we're certainly going to keep up that work. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much to all of our witnesses. Really enjoyed the hearing today. I yield back, Mr.